Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Salman Schechter, Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed in New York City. Shalom to all. Today, we're recording this on day 135. 135, still praying for the hostages, praying for any kind of speedy resolution to their plight, and our thoughts with them, as well as all of our friends and family in Israel during this very challenging time. We are in Parasha Tetzaveh this week. Parasha Tetzaveh starts. We're gonna start with the opening, okay, and then we're gonna go to. I'm gonna use the two of you as my therapists here, okay, for this Parsha.
Are you going to pay us?
I could, yeah, I'll give you a cup of coffee, okay, but. All right. B'nei Yisrael, you shall command B'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel. Take the beaten olive oil, katit lamaor la'alot ner tamid, for using this as oil in order to light the ner tamid, the light that will be lit constantly. Ba'ol moed. It will be in the tent of meeting, michutz laparochet, outside of the covering, the veiled covering, asher al ha'idut, that's on the testimony. Yaroch oto Aaron uvanav, Aaron and his sons will light it, me'erev ad boker, from evening to morning, lifnei Adonai, before God, hukat olam ledorotam, a law for all generations, made b'nei Israel. All right, so I want to start with, let's understand this, the different aspects of this mitzvah, the components of it, and let's take this a little breath, and we'll shuckle a little bit and daven it a little bit and enjoy it a little bit to see what it says. So I'm going to turn to you, Barry. This commandment is, in detail, what are we talking about here?
So we have to have an image, I think, of the Ohel Moed. So the Ohel Moed consists of two rectangles. In the center of one rectangle is the altar of sacrifice, where the Olah and the other animals will be slaughtered and offered up to God. And that is in the Chatzer, the courtyard, which is open air. And then in the other rectangle, there are two structures, the Holy and the Holy of Holies. The Holy is twice as big as the Holy. And in the Holy section, we find a menorah, a table, and the altar of incense. And it's a covered structure, and therefore the function of the menorah is to provide light. And that light has to be lit regularly. Every evening and every morning, the Kohanim have to tend to it so that they have light so they can see what they're doing. The Kodesh, on the other hand, is restricted use. It's only available on Yom Kippur when the high priest goes in, and there's a rabbinic dispute as to what kind of light source is provided for the Kohen Gadol, whether there's any, or he goes in a cloud of smoke from incense so he won't see God. But that's a discussion for another day.
That was super clear, with the one exception is that you sometimes said Kodesh when you meant Kodesh Kodeshim. Isn't the Kodesh Kodeshim, is it not one? You said two structures. Is it not one structure with a screen? Is the parochet?
That's what we're talking about. Yes.
Okay, you could look at it like that, but sometimes a curtain functions as a wall. So your point is a good one, but the dimensions have to be clear. That the Kodesh HaKodeshim is half the size of the Kodesh.
So when I ask about the parochet, then the screen, if it's one room and the screen, is it at the top of the thing, or is it, in other words, can the menorah in the Kodesh also illuminate over the screen into the Beit Kodesh HaKodeshim?
I don't believe so, because my understanding is that what we call a curtain is equivalent to a wall. Like you think of a social hall, those curtains that are in social halls can be used as dividers, and they go floor to ceiling.
All the way to the top. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was the parochet was adorned and with all sorts of,
and it's thick skin. It's not a curtain like we think of in our house.
Well, then, was the Kodesh Kodeshim illuminated in any way inside the Holy of Holies, where the Ark
Well, so the question is, you have to open the curtain in order to get in. So presumably whatever light had been in the Kodesh would illuminate the Kodesh HaKodeshim. I mean, that's how I understand it.
So you understand it. All right. So from this we get the expression ner tamid, and that already, filters through to Judaism, and that becomes the ner tamid of the synagogue. So people will recognize this phrase ner tamid, and they'll be able to identify it as the lantern or the illuminating, the light, at the front of a synagogue, usually suspended by some kind of chain. I mean, in my synagogue, beautiful ner tamid, a nice glass bowl that's suspended from the ceiling, and it's constantly illuminated, and you get the sense, that is a religious symbol. That's different, though.
It is different, and it's worth thinking about the imagery because the Ner Tamid in the synagogue is always in front of the ark.
Yeah.
The ark in the synagogue contains our Torah, whereas the ark in the Mishkan and in the temple may have had the tablets in it, but I think, as Martin Buber stresses, was originally supposed to be an empty box. But that is our experience of the divine, is somehow in our approach and attitude to the ark. And what we have in our synagogue is a complete transformation of symbols taken from the Mishkan and the Ohel Moed. They mean things very differently to us than I think we can appropriately imagine they meant for our ancestors.
Right.
But just to think for a moment, we think of the Ner Tamid as a singular object, when in fact, I think the correct symbolism is it's supposed to illuminate the ark for us in the synagogue.
Mhm.
It's supposed to shed God. We were talking earlier about God's light. This is God's light.
Well, let's
We
talk.
identify with the Torah.
The just two slightly random thoughts about this. One is that for the synagogue, until Thomas Edison, they had a different set of problems, right? And so the thought that the synagogue would always be, the lights were always on in the synagogue is quite beautiful. If you can imagine, wherever you are, you're in Hungary in 1674 or something like that, or you're in Morocco. We make sure that whenever you come to the synagogue, it's a place of luminosity. The second thing I was going to say was, I was just reminded as you were talking about, like, what is the illumination inside the Beit Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, the external menorah is not going to get there. So in the Haftarah, we're recording this on Sunday morning. Yesterday was Truman. We read the Haftarah, and that's about Solomon's temple, and it's that he makes for the house, the bite, where it's clearly a big structure, a permanent structure, not the portable tabernacle. He makes it Chalonei Shekufim Atumim, which is a sort of a paradoxical term. I think the translation gives it recessed and latticed, or something like that. But if you just read the words, windows which were transparent and closed. And the midrashic way of reading it is that in an ancient building, the windows were what is this? Like they were angled so that they brought all the light in and then brought it to the room. But in the Beit HaMikdash, it was the other way. The light source was in the Beit HaMikdash, and the windows extended out of the world to illuminate the rest of the world, thanks to the holy place. So you do get some vibe that the light is the divine presence, and the light is the Torah. I also love what you said about the empty box, especially in the Beit Sheni, in the rebuilt temple. There's nothing there, but it's still, sacred.
Well, okay, so let's go for a second on the idea that God loves to illuminate the world. This is based on a midrash in Shmot Rabbah, where there's a list, or it starts out with saying God has desire, ta'ava, nitava, for four things. One of them is lisbol, which is a kind of to be burdened by the world, lishmor et olamo, to keep the world or to guard the world, and then it's laha'ir et olamo, to illuminate the world. And it only lists three, but through careful examination of parallel text, there's who zan et olamoy, feeds the world. Okay, so let's just focus on the idea that God loves to illuminate the world, and that where the midrash goes with this is that God loves to illuminate the world, and so here he gives Israel a commandment to illuminate the Mishkan, or to illuminate that area in the Mishkan as a way of imitation. But talk about, the idea of light and the idea of God illuminating, and what gives us, this kind of spiritual pleasure in this, Barry, or
So there's a fascinating controversy from the Middle Ages when the text of the Siddur was more permanently fixed. So the phrase that we have in the first blessing before the Shema is Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, that God should grant a new light on Zion. And the reason why it was controversial is because the bracha is cast, the blessing is cast as God is the creator of light, and now we have this invocation of a new light, which suggests the messianic period. And not all the rabbis were comfortable including it, although anyone who's used the Siddur for the last 1,000 years or so will recognize that the change has become permanent.
Among us
But
Ashkenazim.
excuse me?
Among us Ashkenazim.
Yeah, of
In the
course.
Mizrahi Siddurim, it's the other way.
Okay. I appreciate that. But we have to think a little bit about light. Light is a powerful force in and of itself, but it also stands for creation as a whole. So when we invoke God as the bringer of light, we're reminded not only of the first day of creation, but of creation however we understand it, including today, the world that we live in. And the idea is that God's light is permanent, even though we may not always see it. And our task is to discover, to illuminate our lives with God's light.
in the spirituality of Jewish worship, and I mean, last week we talked about, put a mishkan, make yourself a mishkan in your heart, and I had difficulty with that, but I don't necessarily have the same amount of difficulty with the meditative aspect of thinking about light, and if you take a little class in meditation, or you read any of the literature on, I mean, Aryeh Kaplan on Jewish meditation, that's where I read it. And I think he talks about this. He's
He
gonna,
should have if he didn't.
yeah. Imagine a point of light. Can you hold that image in your mind, for a second, and that's a meditative exercise. Um, he also talks about, the repeating of words, Mayim, Eish, Shalom. These are different kinds of mantra meditations. I'm wondering, not that if you had any experience of this, but what the meditation on light, and what the idea. I mean, I don't have a problem. I have a problem putting a mishkan in my heart. Okay, I don't have a problem putting light in there. I don't know.
I
This is
don't
the therapy part of
understand.
this.
I don't understand the first part of the problem, but the second part is rich, right? Like
Yeah.
meditations, you know, I'm thinking of a number of medieval Kabbalistic texts that are about looking at like both imagining light. There's also a meditation in the Zohar that you're supposed to look at a candle, a burning candle, and the different colors of the flame, like the blue flame, and then the whiter, and then the yellow hue around the yellow aura around. Are they supposed to represent the sephirotic system? The different aspects of the divine.
As opposed to
And
oxygen and carbon.
yeah, it's more poetic this way. And but also and maybe we can get to it now. We can get to it a little bit later, but the Hebrew word or light, spelled Aleph Vav Resh, the Hebrew word or with the ayin Vav Resh, is skin. And Adam and Eve, God makes them when they leave the garden, kutnot or with an ayin, makes them coats of skin to wear because they're leaving the innocence of the garden. But it's a long train in Jewish mysticism that God made them kutnot or with an ayin, because until then they had kutnot or with an aleph. They had luminous bodies,
Yeah.
and so like to meditate on light, the light that the menorah gives, the light, the menorah is a sort of an arboreal, a tree image, the tree of light. Moses saw one of those. God is at one point in the end of the Torah called Shochni Sneh, the one who dwells in the bush. So you have this idea that the major experiences are these moments when there are trees of light, and we have a tree of light here in the Mishkan that they're described, and you have bodies of light. And so getting in touch with a kind of inner radiance is a pretty spiritual thing. The world can be dark, especially as alluded to before, before Thomas Edison, and the night is dark and full of terrors, they say in Game of Thrones. But there are ways to access that light.
So I want to just thank you for the segue, because saying clothed in light obviously brings to mind a large portion of the Parsha, which is very difficult for us to relate to, which is where, I want to present the problem, which is here, several verses, chapter in the whole Parsha deals with the clothing of the high priest and the clothing of the priests. And we have to really engage our imaginations and a little bit of technical skill in terms of interpretation, in terms of reading, to really try and conjure a picture of this in our minds. And then, of course, the reader is likely to say, "Oh, come on, I mean, what's the point of this? Why do we need this discussion? What's the impact of this discussion? These it's very difficult to gain access to. It's very difficult to connect to and to derive any kind of spiritual meaning out of it. And I'm wondering where we could go with this, and what would be, what would be the helper to people like ourselves, or people in our congregations or in our communities, who want to gain access to this. Help me figure this out. I want, you're saying the Torah is meaningful. Well, I'm not sure I find the underwear of the high priest meaningful.
Okay, so I think that one way to look at the clothing that's described in the Parsha is it's not clothing in the way that we ordinarily think of it. It's a uniform. And it's the uniform that distinguishes the priest and the high priest from everyone else. So our teacher and colleague, Rabbi Neil Gilman, suggested in one of his books, in stating his own belief in bodily incarnation at the end of days, is that we can't imagine ourselves without our bodies. And that's why he thought in the end of days, our bodies would be restored to us. But it raises the interesting question: when we imagine ourselves, do we imagine ourselves naked or with clothes? And I think it's an important point, because I kind of think that most of us imagine ourselves clothed, but not with clothes, meaning that we don't imagine ourselves naked, but we don't really differentiate the clothes that might cover our body. But what we have in the Parsha are specific things, because people have to be able to recognize who the priest and the high priest is, and they can only do that by the clothes that they wear.
Well, I just want to pick up on that, because I find it very, very interesting that when they are inaugurated as priest, the instructions for that are given here, and it's in chapter 29. Okay, so we get through the description of the clothing, and then there's an ordination ceremony. This is what you should do to sanctify them, and it's then verse 5. I'm sorry, verse 4. Ve'et Aaron ve'et banav takriv. Bring Aaron and his sons close. El petach ha'moed, to the entrance of the tent of meeting. V'rachatzta otam b'mayim, and wash them. And I'm thinking, this is perfect. Okay, this is a connection to the whole idea of clothing, nakedness, and how you imagine yourself. Now, I think there's one little, asterisk I would put on your comments, Barry, which is that we have mirrors today. Mirrors are quite common. If you go to any gym or workout room, that's there. You're always looking at yourself. So you're always looking at your body. All right. Assuming that you're clothed when you do the workout. Okay. And part of the experience is I look at my body, I see and I have an idealized view of my body, that my body is going to be muscular, thinner, whatever. And so we do have ideas of the body and ideas of nakedness, I guess. But here it is. It doesn't say they're literally naked, but I am extrapolating and saying v'rachatzta. Okay, so how is he going to wash them? Is he going to wash them with their clothes on, or is he going to wash them naked? And so I'm literally placing Aaron and his sons in the front of the Ohel Moed. I'm taking off their clothes, and I'm either dunking them in a vat or spritzing water on them or pouring water on them. And I don't, I'm not going to go beyond that in terms of imagination as how they're washed. Okay, but there's some liquid and there's some body here. And what would that mean?
Well, I think that, I mean, you said a vat, okay, and this story is happening, or to the extent that this is a narrative, I mean, it's a description of
Or a pit.
a pit. There's a description of, to the extent that there's a real story here. It's the traveling tabernacle in Moses' era in the desert, but these stories are very closely connected as prefiguring of the temple that Solomon will later build, right? So we're reading about the Mishkan, but I think that most readers, throughout history or ancient times or whatever, would have correlated it to the actual sanctuaries in their lives that were permanent. And there's mikvaot. There's lots of mikvaot and there's lots of dunking. So I think you may be making a little too much out of this, because it's not. Yes, I think that there's a moment of nakedness. I don't think that this means that in the eyes of 600,000 foot soldiers from Israel, they're all naked. I think it means
Why not? Why not?
uh, because it would be weird.
Well, because if we jump ahead to Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, and the literal description of incest is to uncover nakedness. And
Right.
that's a bad thing.
and
So I
also,
don't
by the
know
way,
that we can think that nakedness itself is considered good in the public sphere.
So
also by the way, it says in the Mishnasayim, if I can find exactly that verse, when they're given the Mishnasayim to wear, it's והיו על אהרון ועל על בניו בבואם אל אוהל מועד או בגישתם אל המזבח לשרת בקודש. I'm sorry, the verse before that. לכסות בשר ערווה. They're supposed to cover
Their nakedness.
the genitals, okay? Which means it's not like it's nuclear if they remain unclothed. It's that their priestly role should be wearing the garments, which, as I don't know if we said it since recording, but we've talked about it, and we will come to it again. The whole point of this spectacular clothing that they have is lechavod uletifaret. It's for glory and adornment and beauty, and so they are going to have to take it off for sometimes, because they're going to have to dunk in the mikvah, as we know from the avodah service on Yom Kippur, and especially the most popular rendition of the avodah service in the entire history of the Jewish people, Yishai Ribo. Yarad Taval Allah v'nistapag. He goes down, he immerses, he comes up, he dries off. And so they do dry off, but I don't think that they imagine that is a public display of that. I think there's probably a screen.
So I'm just going to push it a little, try one more time, which is why not? And the question, why not, considering that people don't have photography there, they don't record and they don't engrave the body in any kind of accessible format, and it's a fleeting format. And I don't want to say it as in a way of a kind of like a fetish here, but the idea that we are publicly demonstrating the nakedness of Aaron and his sons, so that we're going to move them from a state of their pre-anointed, ordained, pre-sanctified state, give them a kind of symbolic rebirth through a public washing, or a washing that is visible to people who are around there, namely Moses. I mean, it's bad enough that Moses has to do this, okay? All right. And then they put the clothing on him. And I go again to this idea that the same thing happens in reverse when Aaron dies. When Aaron dies, we go to Bamidbar, we go to Parshat Chukat, in the death of Aaron's, where by a shit, they strip Aaron of the clothing, and they place the clothing on Elazar. That, you can't get more symbolic than that. He loses the vestments, and Elazar is invested. And what is he standing there in his gutkes? He's standing there. He's naked. He's
No, he's
naked.
standing in
And,
yours.
and,
No,
and,
I think
so wait.
wait,
And then he goes and he dies. Okay, and he dies. I think he
never.
dies naked. Sorry.
Okay, what I would like to suggest is there's a value in taking an anthropological approach to the text. And I think that one of the things that we can say is that all animals, including human beings, are bounded physically by their bodies, that the body establishes the limits of our being. But what distinguishes human beings from animals is that human beings wear clothes, and that part of our humanity, our being human, is wearing clothes. And that's why I think, your eloquence notwithstanding, the nakedness is not something that would be prized even in the Bible, because by definition, again, following my anthropological reading, human beings require clothes.
I
But
think.
at a certain ground zero of humanness, there's nakedness, and that's
Okay,
what's being touched here. Go ahead.
So the one thing that basically I'm on Barry's side about this. I think that the point is that the Kohanim generally, the Kohen Gadol in particular, are invested with the spectacular trappings of their office, lechavod tifaret,
All right. Okay.
for dignity and beauty, and exposing them would be culturally a denigration. And I want to just point this out in one other way. Is the end of Parshat, there's a couple of mitzvot at the end of Parshat Yitro, after the great story of Revelation. There's a couple of mitzvot sprinkled there before we get to the covenant code in Mishpatim. And one of them is, that the Kohanim have to have like a ramp up to get to the Mizbeach, so that they don't expose their genitals to the stones. Now, maybe that means that the michnasayim that we have here in this parsha, which is underwear, that they're not wearing them, and somehow the Kohanim who are imagined back there in 20 or 21, whatever that is,
20.
are somehow not wearing undergarments, and therefore, if they took big long strides, they would be exposing their genitals to the stones. But basically, what I think it means is, it could mean that, but basically what I think it means is that, in fact, it would be, I'm going to say this with a little humor, it would be like a massive insult to be prancing around naked.
Okay, I agree with you.
But I'm going to give you one thing on your side of the ledger here.
Okay, thank you.
Which I emerges from the way you said it, and as great eloquence. Is there some way in which the Kohen is Adam Harishon, is the first human being?
Nice.
So if a newly perfected human being, and a Kohen is supposed to be a perfect symbol of humanity, emerges, then maybe we go through a process analogous to the one that Adam Harishon goes through, from innocence and nakedness to ultimate clothing. As I alluded before with the garments of light and the garments of skin, this is one of my favorite passages in the Tanakh. It's a crazy passage. Ezekiel 28 tells a kind of a fallen angel story, and the fallen angel is the king of Tyre, Tsur, the city in Lebanon today, and he was in the garden, and he was perfect, but he grew arrogant, and he was expelled from the garden. And the body of the king of Tsur in Ezekiel 28 is described. It's not exactly the same, but it parallels the gemstones in the breastplate of the high priest, which would mean that somehow the Kohen who wears this you know
Stones.
he wears this breastplate, uh, sort of a whatever you call it there, the Choshen Mishpat, which is made of gemstones. It's as if his body is not a normal human body. It's a body made of precious stones. And some of you may know that there's a famous Nachman of Breslov story, the boy whose body is all gemstones. And so you have this image of a kind of supernatural or preternatural perfection. And so maybe if the Kohen Gadol is supposed to be the primeval Adam, then maybe they're actually, I could see where nakedness would have to be a
All
part
right.
of that.
So you both helped me a lot because, as I say, I'm looking for the story here. I'm looking for the story beyond just these beautiful descriptions of what materials are being used, how they're being used, what the measurements are, what the implements are, what the different things are. And I want a story that relates to me, and I want a story that relates to the past, and I want a story that relates to an ideal. And what you're saying here is that hovering in these descriptions is a drama, the drama of excellence, chavod utifaret, which, I mean, just give us a good translation of lechavod uletifaret. I love the words. We say, what would you say? Lechavod uletifaret, Jeremy.
For grandeur and beauty.
Grandeur and beauty.
So earlier, I think, Jeremy, you used the phrase glory and adornment, which I think also works.
So the idea that these are accessible in the religious experience, and and I have to add as a footnote, the phrase appears, of course, in the bracha for the haftarah, after the haftarah, lechavod uletifaret, and it's also woven into the ceremonial phrase of lighting the torches on Yom Ha'atzmaut in Israel. When they have honored people light torches for Israel's birthday anniversary, and they say lichvod medinat uletiferet medinat Israel. I'm doing this for the glory and for the beauty to beautify Israel. And I think there's a very powerful idea that the Kohen wears this. And so we get, we've gone from light, the internal light, to this idea that there's an external here also, and there's a story of moving, I guess, from the inside to the outside and from the outside to the inside. I'm not sure what to make of it.
All
Either
right,
way,
so I'll tell you what to make of it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that we need to recognize, first of all, sprinkled through the Parsha are several psukim, which speak about God being present in one form or another before the people. And it gives us a context for the clothing, because the purpose of the clothing is to bring God into our world. It's not to keep God separate somehow, or to focus on the Kohen and its clothing without contemplating what the function of the Kohen is, which is to bring God's presence into the world. I like very much what you said about looking for the story. And we have to recognize that we're a little further down the road than our ancestors. And so we have a different story. We like to celebrate and go back and investigate the past, but sometimes we have to recognize that we've moved past the past. We're further down the road and we need a new story because our ancestors' story doesn't quite work for us
That's
anymore.
very nice.
But we totally get the specialness of the uniform. I was talking with one of my congregants who recently became a judge, and the whole robing thing,
There you
he
go.
said, it's quite powerful, and we can totally get. I mean, Elliot, if you laced on the skates and got to wear the Montreal Canadiens
Absolutely.
uniform, you would feel kavodu tiferet for sure.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to end this and bring it there. So it is about Kavod there. And there's a great story here. And this was a great conversation. And we want to thank the people watching and listening to us. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being such loyal fans of this. 2 weeks ago we had over 250 views, almost 300 views of the the show on different formats. I don't know if that's a record. We've been doing this close to 4 years, so we've had thousands of views. We're so proud of
Do
ourselves.
you know something? Somebody was in shul yesterday,
Yeah.
a high school junior, and his bar mitzvah was on Truma 4 years ago, and it's the last one before the pandemic. And
Wow.
I said to him, I didn't remember saying this, but he said that I told people to not shake hands that day, but to do fist bumps, and look where we are now.
Where we are now, beyond that. Well, thank you all. And it's early in the week. We'll put it out. We'll wish you all a good week and then a beautiful Shabbat. And we'll see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.